Back in the 1700s and 1800s, the world was heading into the Industrial Revolution. Science, agriculture, and trade were all advancing, setting the stage for mass production and economic growth. But while we often hear about the progress it brought, it came with a heavy human cost, one that changed how people lived in ways we still feel today. So, what really drove this dramatic shift?
The Industrial Revolution brought about a fundamental shift from agrarian life to an industrial economy, transforming the way goods were produced, traded, and consumed. With the Agrarian Revolution, traditional farm industries and families were replaced with industrial enterprises because of the lesser need of manpower in the farms. At the core of production in the cities was the mechanization of production by innovations like the steam engine and the spinning jenny, which revolutionized manufacturing like never before. This led to the rise of large-scale factories that enabled mass and overly efficient production. These factories were working non-stop, manufacturing goods and assembling them in large quantities in a very short time. Traditional craftsmanship and family workshops were abandoned to the mass-produced goods. The result was cheaper goods, rising consumer demand, and rapid industrial growth. Capital investments and the development of banking and financial systems played a crucial role in increasing growth. There was also competition among the patrons who tried to produce and sell more than the others, and voila, the capitalism as we today know was born in this free market. Global trade expanded quickly, often alongside colonial expansion. The expansion of factories and industrial opportunities fueled the growth of cities and the construction of railroads and canals, linking production centers with national and international markets.
As mentioned before, cities began to grow rapidly as people moved from rural areas to urban areas in search of factory work. With this mass migration, workers suddenly found themselves in cramped, overcrowded shanty towns with no privacy and unsanitary conditions. This sudden uprooting of people from the countryside also created a sense of alienation and isolation. Families often had minimal access to clean water and shared poorly ventilated apartments. Inadequate sewage systems, lack of ventilation and garbage collection, and the spread of diseases such as cholera and tuberculosis made many workers vulnerable to these diseases, leading to high mortality rates. Furthermore, the government failed to intervene to improve living conditions. Without labor laws protecting workers in factories, many working long hours in unsafe conditions also dramatically changed workers' health and living conditions. These terrible and unhealthy living conditions affected family structures emotionally, leading to serious mental health problems such as stress, anxiety, and depression, and even increased crime and alcoholism in some areas. The use of child labor also led to poorer education and further perpetuated the cycle of poverty. Although industrialization brought economic prosperity to a minority community, many working-class families were forced to leave their families behind in order to make ends meet.
During the Industrial Revolution, childhood didn't mean play for everyone. Many children were sent into coal mines or factories, tiny hands doing dangerous tasks. Covered in soot, crawling through narrow shafts, their days were long, dark, and exhausting. This wasn't rare. It was reality. Factory life meant relentless hours. Workers, men, women, and children, spent up to 18 hours a day in noisy, suffocating places. Breaks were short. Fatigue wasn't an excuse, it was punished. For many, time lost all meaning. Each day was a blur of labor, hunger, and aching bodies. Wages reflected the harsh social hierarchy. Men earned 12 shillings per week. Women got half of that, and children even less. This wasn't based on skill, it was based on power. Employers chose the cheapest hands, not the most capable ones. Poverty was passed down generation after generation.
Such cruelties, such long hours, imposed upon tender years, demand not only the sympathy, but the interference of the legislature. The nation cannot, in humanity or conscience, allow its children to be thus sacrificed to avarice.
As public outrage grew, voices from inside the system began to speak out. The 1842 Sandler Report exposed the brutality faced by children and women in factories. Its stories, painful, detailed, and undeniable, called attention to the urgent need for reform. Reformers like Richard Ostler and Lord Shaftesbury answered that call. They campaigned for shorter hours, better conditions, and the end of child labor. All their efforts pushed Parliament to act. These reforms didn't just change factories, they changed lives and the law itself.
During the Industrial Revolution, the workforce endured poor working conditions as a result of a lack of proper laws and regulations regarding work. At the time, there were no laws for a standard minimum wage, nor were there any laws regarding child labor. To make ends meet, children as young as 6 years old were made to work and for very little pay. Work hours were also egregious, with the work hours of some factories being up to 19 hours long. Workers were usually treated very harshly by their bosses, often getting severely beaten for arriving late to work. Late arrivals were fairly common due to the fact that many workers lived miles away from the factories, as well as because of work hours starting as early as 2 a.m. Workers were also kept working under the threat of severe beatings to ensure they did not slow down from fatigue. Such beating was given out indiscriminately regardless of age or gender. Despite long working hours, only an hour during the time of lunch was usually allowed for workers to rest. Often, children never managed to interact with their parents more than during their dinner or breakfast. However, these meals were a luxury many children never managed to enjoy. Workers report crying throughout the factories, and almost never does a full hour pass without hearing it. One worker reports running and crying all the way to his mill after waking up out of fear and anticipation of cruel beatings for being late. As cruel as these conditions were, people often thought they never had a choice in the matter, as they would not send their children to work nor work themselves were it not a necessity. As mentioned before, many of these workers were from the rural parts of the country and moved to the city in order to try and financially support themselves after machines and automation rendered their work obsolete. However, many sought better conditions as they thought this way of living was too much to bear. As a result, many movements have been made, such as the labor movement, in which people sought higher wages, better working conditions, and better treatment from employers. Another movement was the 10-hour movement, which aimed to reduce working hours for children under 16. While a response to this movement was made, resulting in the passing of a Factory Act in 1831, limiting the working hours to 12 hours for those under 18 years of age, this act was unfortunately hardly ever enforced. By 1833, a new Factory Act banned factories from employing children under 9 years of age. Children aged 9 to 13 had a maximum working week of 48 hours, limited to 8 hours per day. Children aged 13 to 18 had a limit of 12 hours per day. Children under 13 had mandatory elementary schooling for 2 hours each day. And most importantly, these regulations were enforced by means of inspections with the power to impose penalties for infringements. While the four-man inspectorate was far too small to cover over 4,000 mills, thus allowing most of these to invade the act, it did create a basis of a system of control.
The Industrial Revolution wasn't just about machines and factories. It changed how people lived, worked, and were treated.
Behind the idea of progress were real human struggles, long hours, low pay, dangerous jobs, and shattered families.
But those hardships sparked change. They lit the fire for workers' rights, education, and reform movements that we still benefit from today.
In many ways, we are still living with the effects of that era.